Did you know that one mistake could cost millions of lives? In this story, the USA decided the fate of the war in just a few days. If you're interested in the truth about World War II, subscribe and hit the like button. There are many shocking facts ahead. Imagine, it's the early morning of August 7th, 1942. The first rays of sunlight begin to stretch across the vast Pacific as waves crash against the shores of Guadalcanal, a remote island in the Solomon Chain. And at that very moment, 11,000 United States Marines step onto the sand. This isn't just a landing. This is the opening act of Operation Watchtower, the first major Allied offensive against the Empire of Japan. Until now, the war in the Pacific had been about holding the line, surviving, retreating. Now it was time to strike. But beyond the artillery blasts and jungle firefights, another entirely unexpected kind of weapon began to emerge. One that carried no weight, made no sound of gunfire, and yet would prove to be crucial in the struggle that followed. It wasn't forged in steel. It was born from language itself. Picture yourself as a sentry standing guard in the oppressive darkness of the island jungle. The air is thick. The vegetation presses in from all sides, and visibility drops to just a few feet. Shadows move. Someone approaches, but who? In the confusion of jungle warfare, with the enemy sometimes clad in captured American uniforms and even speaking English, how can you tell friend from foe? One mistake could mean death. What would you do? The solution came from an unlikely place, a single letter, and the key was in how it was pronounced. Master Technical Sergeant James W. Hurlbut, a combat correspondent with the United States Marine Corps Reserve, landed alongside the assault forces on that very day, August 7th. Months later, in an interview recorded on March 10, 1943, and preserved in official naval records, he revealed a security tactic that became common practice during the campaign. His words offer us the most direct primary source we have on the use of pronunciation as a line of defense in the Pacific. We always had passwords including the letter L, Hurlbut recalled, because L was thought to be hard for the Japanese to pronounce since there is no L in the Japanese vocabulary. Imagine that. A simple linguistic observation born from phonetic patterns in the Japanese language transformed into a razor-sharp security measure in the dead of night. In a war fought with machine guns and tanks, a single consonant became a test of life or death. And it worked, often. But not always. Hurlbut himself noted a serious limitation. The test could fail against English-educated Japanese soldiers, and sometimes did. The enemy wasn't static. He adapted, studied, listened. The measure was smart, effective, and fast, but it wasn't foolproof. By 1600 hours on August 8th, just one day after the landing, American forces had seized the nearly completed Japanese airstrip. Originally known as Lungar Airfield under Japanese control, it was quickly renamed Henderson Field, in honor of Major Lofton R. Henderson, a Marine aviator who had been killed at the Battle of Midway. 4 days later, on August 12th, the first PBY Catalina flying boat touched down. By August 20th, the airfield was fully operational, hosting 31 aircraft. That stretch of land, scarred and hastily constructed, would become the heart of the entire 6-month-long campaign. Everything, every ambush, every assault, every drop of blood would circle around the control of Henderson Field. And the Japanese knew it. Time and again, they launched assaults to take it back. Sometimes in force, sometimes in shadows. Night after night, enemy forces, agile, silent, relentless, crept through the jungle. They moved in pairs and squads, or even alone, slipping past natural barriers, seeking to sabotage, to mislead, to strike. The jungle gave them cover. The dark gave them power. The line between known and unknown, between Marine and infiltrator, became razor thin. Sentries stood alone at checkpoints, heartbeat thundering in their ears, forced to make split-second decisions in total darkness. One wrong call meant disaster. And so they relied on a fragile thread, not uniforms, not papers, not even faces, but the sound of a word, the echo of a letter. Traditional methods of identification were powerless here, but a single syllable, mispronounced, could unmask the enemy. Language had become a weapon. Documents could be forged, copied, stolen. Uniforms taken from the dead. Appearance? In the darkness of the jungle, that meant nothing. And voices, even those couldn't be trusted. Some Japanese soldiers spoke English, and some spoke it well enough to hold a conversation. The Marines needed something else, something no enemy could fake, a test the human body couldn't cheat, something built not on conscious control, but on the invisible architecture of language itself. That something came from deep within the mechanics of speech, from the limits imposed by the very sound system of the Japanese language. To grasp why this method worked so effectively, we need to journey into the roots of how languages form and shape perception. English and Japanese, though both human tongues, inhabit vastly different phonetic worlds. English has two liquid sounds, the L and the R. Each is distinct. The L, a lateral approximant, is made by pressing the tip of the tongue against the ridge behind the upper teeth while letting air flow along the sides. The American R, on the other hand, is produced further back in the mouth, a post-alveolar approximant, with the tongue curled and not touching the roof at all. Now step into the Japanese sound system. It has only one liquid phoneme, represented by the letter R, in Romanized Japanese, but sounding like neither an English R nor an L. It's what linguists call an apico-alveolar tap, where the tongue quickly flicks against the ridge behind the front teeth. It's a single sound category that, for native Japanese speakers, swallows both English L and R into one indistinct blur. And here lies the key. This isn't a matter of physical inability. Japanese speakers can, with training, produce both English sounds. They can even hear the difference when the sounds are isolated, unnatural, stripped of context. But in the flow of real speech, their brains default to what was etched into them during early childhood. During the critical period when the mind categorizes speech sounds, Japanese speakers form one bucket for both L and R. And once that bucket is there, it's incredibly hard to undo. Even years of living abroad doesn't necessarily override it. In 1995, researchers Takagi and Mann found that Japanese individuals who had lived in the United States for more than a decade still struggled significantly with distinguishing R and L sounds, far more than native speakers did. Earlier, in 1975, Miyawaki and his colleagues conducted a fascinating experiment. They altered the acoustic profile of R and L recordings to make them sound less like human speech. Suddenly, Japanese listeners could hear the difference just fine. This confirmed it wasn't about hearing at all. It was about interpretation, how the brain automatically files away incoming sounds into known linguistic categories. For Marines on Guadalcanal, this meant one thing: a foolproof method of detection. No matter how well an enemy soldier knew English, no matter how confident his vocabulary or grammar, the L sound would betray him. Under stress, In the rush of nighttime contact, he would revert involuntarily to his native phonology, and it would be enough. So the Marines weaponized that. They crafted passwords with the letter L, not once, but multiple times. Hurlbut's testimony confirms it. These challenge words weren't randomly chosen. They were designed deliberately to trip up the tongue. When a sentry issued the password, a native English speaker would respond smoothly without even thinking. But an infiltrator, no matter how well prepared, would most likely stumble, not out of ignorance, but because his mouth, shaped by years of habit, simply couldn't produce what his brain never truly registered. It was a security measure rooted in how the human mind learns and how it resists unlearning. Language in this case became not just a tool of communication, but a shield against deception. One particular word has etched itself into the margins of the historical record, though its presence rests on a single, solitary source. Oliver Gramling, a journalist for the Associated Press, published "Free Men Are Fighting: The Story of World War II in 1942, a work released by Farrar and Reinhardt while the war was still raging. On page 315 of that book, Gramling described a chilling reality. Japanese soldiers would sometimes approach American checkpoints pretending to be either U.S. or Filipino military personnel. To counter this, he wrote, sentries used a linguistic tripwire, a shibboleth, such as Lollapalooza. If the first two syllables came back as Rora, the sentry would not wait for the rest. He would fire. Let that sink in. A single word, Lollapalooza, could draw the line between life and death. It's a perfect choice, if indeed it was used. Slangy, quintessentially American, it meant something impressive or extraordinary. And more importantly, it contained not one, not two, but 4 L sounds, each perched at the beginning of a syllable, Lollapalooza. For a native English speaker, it rolled off the tongue with ease. But for a Japanese speaker, each of those L's was a hidden landmine. The phonological structure of Japanese made it almost impossible to pronounce the word correctly without serious and prolonged training. Each L called out like a signal flare to a trained ear. Listening for just the first 2 syllables, Lola, made operational sense. In the pitch-black tension of night patrols, a sentry didn't have time to indulge in full phonetic analysis. Split-second decisions saved lives. If Lola turned into Rora, there was no need to wait. Still, we must be careful with claims. While Lollapalooza fits the pattern and the purpose, the only documented mention comes from Gramling's wartime publication. It's a contemporary source, written during the conflict itself by a journalist with verified access to military units. That gives it weight. But no other official Marine Corps documents, after-action reports, or personal memoirs confirm the use of that exact word. Guadalcanal Diary by Richard Tregaskis, published in 1943, and based on his time embedded with troops on the island, makes no mention of it. Nor does Robert Leckey's Helmet for My Pillow or other first-hand recollections. In contrast, the use of L-based passwords in general is directly confirmed by Master Technical Sergeant James W. Hurlbut's testimony, a clear and reliable primary source. Lollapalooza fits within that framework. It's plausible, but not definitively proven. The broader truth, however, remains unshaken. From August 7, 1942 to February 9, 1943, the campaign for Guadalcanal raged. In those 6 months, American forces, first the Marines, later reinforced by the Army, held fast against relentless Japanese attempts to retake the island and, crucially, Henderson Field. the airstrip became the beating heart of the conflict. It was the key, and the Japanese knew it. Major battles punctuated the campaign like thunderclaps. The Battle of the Tenaru on August 24th, where waves of Japanese troops hurled themselves into American positions. The brutal, desperate stand on Edson's Ridge from September 12 to 14, and the pivotal battle for Henderson Field itself from October 23 to 26, a clash that would determine control of the airfield and shift the momentum of the war in the Pacific. Between these major confrontations, the nights brought no peace. The threat of infiltration was constant. Japanese forces excelled in stealth. They moved with terrifying quiet through terrain they had studied with precision. They camouflaged themselves by attaching foliage directly to their uniforms, becoming part of the jungle itself. Many operated alone or in small units. Some spoke English. Reports even recorded incidents where Japanese soldiers impersonated American troops, hoping to slip through the lines under the cover of darkness. The danger was not imagined. It was real, and it was ceaseless. Hurlbut, in his March 1943 interview, added one final unexpected twist. On at least one occasion, a sentry identified infiltrators not by their pronunciation, not by their uniforms, but by their grammar. The giveaway? The speech was too perfect. One enemy soldier reportedly shouted, "Hold your fire," with a level of precision and clarity uncharacteristic of the average Marine. In that moment, polished language, usually a mark of education, became a fatal flaw. The infiltrator had betrayed himself not by how he said it, but by saying it too well. "We are American Marines and wish to report our evening's activities." That's what the infiltrator said. The words were perfect, but the moment they left the man's mouth, the sentry opened fire. Why? Because, as the Marine later explained, "I knew no Marine would talk that way." That kind of precise formal phrasing, too polished, too correct, was its own kind of giveaway. In this shadow war, language wasn't just a tool for communication. It was a minefield. Every word spoken could either affirm loyalty or betray deception. And in that environment, pronunciation testing became one of the most dependable tools American forces had for identifying friend from foe. It didn't rely on documents that could be forged. It didn't need uniforms, which could be stripped from the dead. It didn't even require a full conversation. A single challenge word, with an L in just the right place, could trip the unconscious habits of an enemy speaker. That was the brilliance of it. It worked because it didn't test what someone knew. It tested what they couldn't control. The concept wasn't new. The word shibboleth itself comes from ancient warfare. In the book of Judges, chapter 12, verses 5 and 6, the Gileadites used it to identify enemy Ephraimites. The test was simple: say the word shibboleth. But the Ephraimites couldn't pronounce the eshe sound. They said sibboleth instead, and were executed on the spot. The same principle echoed centuries later on the beaches of Normandy. On June 6, 1944, as Allied forces stormed the coast of France, challenge and password phrases were carefully selected to screen out German infiltrators. The system worked like this. The sentry challenged with the word flash. The correct response was thunder, and the countersign was welcome. Each of these words contained phonemes that posed difficulty for native German speakers. The TH sound in thunder doesn't exist in German. It's often replaced with a D or Z sound. And the W in welcome? In standard German phonology, that becomes more like a V. Just as the LR contrast exposed Japanese speakers in the Pacific, these phonetic differences caught German speakers on the Western Front. But the Pacific presented unique and brutal challenges. The jungle was its own kind of enemy. Thick foliage reduced visibility to a few feet. Rain poured down in sheets, and the Japanese forces favored night attacks, infiltration, and chaos. In such conditions, sentries couldn't rely on sight or documents. They had only seconds to decide. And so the challenge password system became critical. One word, one response. That's all the time there was. And for the system to work, the words had to be clever, crafted not just to be secret, but to be hard for the enemy to say. English, rich in phonemes, offered plenty of opportunities. The English V sound, for example, doesn't exist in Japanese. It's often replaced with B. The TH sounds, both the voiceless one in thing and the voiced one in this, are also absent. English vowels, with their dizzying variety, posed another challenge. But the LR distinction remained the most effective and most widely used based on the records we have. This use of language as a security measure wasn't just tactical. It was rooted in the way the human brain acquires speech. During early childhood, our minds form sound categories that persist into adulthood. And even with training, those categories are stubborn. A Japanese soldier might know the password. He might know what it was supposed to sound like, but in the dark, under pressure, his mouth would reveal the truth. The irony is that while pronunciation testing helped catch Japanese infiltrators, thousands of Japanese Americans were helping to win the war from the other side. Just months before Guadalcanal, on November 1st, 1941, the U.S. Army established the Military Intelligence Service Language School at the Presidio of San Francisco. But following Executive Order 906, which led to the forced internment of Japanese Americans on the West Coast, the school relocated to Camp Savage, Minnesota, in June 1942. 2 years later, it moved again to Fort Snelling. There, it operated until June 1946, and during that time, it trained over 6,000 Nisei, second-generation Japanese Americans, in the Japanese language. These men, born and raised in the United States, served as interpreters, translators, and intelligence officers. They went behind enemy lines. They decoded documents. They interrogated prisoners. They played a vital role in the Pacific theater, even as their own families were interned at home. So while pronunciation tests served as a line of defense against infiltration, Japanese American soldiers were turning language into a bridge, into a weapon of understanding, precision, and intelligence gathering. In the end, both sides of the story reveal the same truth. Language is never neutral. In wartime, every sound can be a signal, every word a weapon. The contribution of Japanese American linguists to the Allied victory in the Pacific was not just significant, it was indispensable. These men, many of them Nisei, second-generation Japanese Americans, stepped into the heart of the conflict armed not with rifles, but with language. They interrogated prisoners, often extracting critical intelligence. They translated captured documents, sometimes unlocking enemy plans or revealing hidden supply routes. They intercepted Japanese radio communications and turned static into strategy. Perhaps most crucially, they brought with them a deep cultural awareness, insight into Japanese thinking, traditions, and military behavior that helped commanders anticipate their opponents' moves. And all of this they did while their own families, back home at the United States, were being held behind barbed wire in internment camps. From a security standpoint, these linguists also introduced an important consideration: Appearance alone could no longer serve as a basis for trust or suspicion. A Japanese face did not equal a Japanese soldier. These men spoke English with native fluency, born and raised in American communities, educated in American schools, shaped by American values. Any L-based challenge would pose no obstacle to them. They'd pronounce Lollapalooza without a hitch. This reality made one thing very clear to military security personnel operating in the Pacific. Ethnic identity could not substitute for individual identification. Sentries needed to know that Japanese ethnicity didn't always signal the enemy, just as an English accent didn't always signal a friend. Human judgment, layered with protocol, became essential. Only a few combat veterans who served in the Pacific later wrote extensively about these security measures. One such veteran was Private First Class Eugene B. Sledge. He enlisted in the Marine Corps and served with K Company, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, 1st Marine Division, the same division that had first landed on Guadalcanal. Sledge would later fight through the hellscapes of Peleliu and Okinawa in some of the bloodiest fighting of the Pacific War. His memoir, With the Old Breed, published in 1981, is now regarded as one of the most powerful and honest personal accounts of infantry combat ever written. While Sledge did not arrive on Guadalcanal until 1944, after the main fighting had ended, his observations reflect the mental and emotional weight carried by those on the front lines. Notably, he does not mention pronunciation testing. His focus remains on the visceral terror of combat, the cost of killing, and the bonds between Marines. And in that silence lies a subtle revelation. If pronunciation testing was as widespread and systematic as some sources suggest, why is it so rarely discussed in the many memoirs of Pacific veterans? The answer may be surprisingly mundane. Effective security procedures, when they work smoothly and without drama, tend to disappear into the background. They become routine, a checklist, a reflex, a habit, no more memorable than tying your boots or cleaning your weapon. That doesn't diminish their value. It simply places them in a category of military practice that, though essential, rarely commands the spotlight in post-war storytelling. Yet the costs of the campaign were unforgettable. The Guadalcanal campaign, which began on August 7, 1942, and ended on February 9, 1943, exacted a brutal price. Approximately 7,100 American servicemen lost their lives. Over 8,000 were wounded. Japanese losses were far greater. Around 31,000 killed, many not by bullets, but by hunger and disease, as American naval forces choked off Japanese supply lines. When the Japanese finally evacuated their remaining troops in February 1943, around 10,000 men who lived to fight another day, the message was unmistakable. Japan had suffered a strategic defeat. The momentum in the Pacific had shifted, and it would never shift back. But as we consider the tactical ingenuity of pronunciation testing, its limitations deserve just as much attention as its strengths. Hurlbut himself acknowledged that the method wasn't foolproof. Japanese soldiers who had spent time in English-speaking environments, whether through study, upbringing, or intelligence assignments, could sometimes pass the test without hesitation. Japan's intelligence services were not oblivious to this, and on occasion deployed English-speaking operatives for infiltration purposes. And the battlefield, chaotic and cacophonous, offered no perfect conditions. In the middle of artillery fire, shouts, and panic, Would a sentry always detect a mispronounced L? Would his ear always be sharp enough? Would his trigger finger wait long enough to be sure? There were dangers here. The danger of false positives, of shooting a friendly due to accent, stress, or regional variation. American forces in the Pacific weren't linguistically uniform. They included Filipino scouts, Chinese-American soldiers, and others whose English carried different rhythms, different accents. The English of Filipino soldiers, for instance, typically posed no issue with L or R sounds, both of which exist in Tagalog and other Filipino languages. But their English might still sound unfamiliar to a sentry trained only to recognize Midwestern or Southern American dialects. The risk of misidentification in the fog of war was very real. And yet, even with its risks and flaws, the pronunciation test remained a clever human solution to an inhuman problem. It turned the quiet rules of phonology, invisible to most, into a tactical instrument of war. A single syllable spoken wrong could mean everything. It was language stripped to its bones, not for expression, not for poetry, not for persuasion, but for survival. Despite its known limitations, the use of pronunciation testing based on L sounds stood out as an elegant, low-tech solution to a very real and immediate problem, distinguishing friend from foe in the dark, chaotic, visually obstructed jungles of the Pacific. It was effective not because it relied on machinery or high-level encryption, but because it tapped into something far more innate: the stable, almost unchangeable patterns of human speech learned in early childhood. Phonological structures acquired in a speaker's first language tend to persist, sometimes stubbornly, despite years of training, and in the case of many Japanese soldiers, that meant the LR distinction remained a persistent vulnerability. This tactical insight proved invaluable when traditional methods of identification, documents, uniforms, or visual recognition were unreliable or completely unavailable. Today, the story of pronunciation testing operates on several levels. For historians, it offers a window into the operational realities of the Guadalcanal campaign and the types of small tactical innovations that often make a difference in combat. For linguists, it provides a striking real-world example of how phonological theory intersects with high-stakes practical application. And for general readers, it is a captivating reminder that even language, something so fundamental and familiar, can be used as a weapon, a shield, a silent test of allegiance. But perhaps more than anything, it serves as a cautionary tale about how history is told. The core of the story, supported by direct testimony and consistent with linguistic science, is as compelling as it is verifiable. American Marines on Guadalcanal used challenge words containing the English L sound, knowing that Japanese infiltrators would likely struggle to pronounce those words correctly. This practice is confirmed in the first-hand account of Master Technical Sergeant James W. Hurlbut. It aligns perfectly with known phonological distinctions between English and Japanese, and it reflects genuine tactical adaptation to the unique security challenges of jungle warfare. The specific use of the word Lollapalooza, as reported by journalist Oliver Gramling in his 1942 book, fits the pattern beautifully. The word is loaded with L sounds, comes from American slang, and is unlikely to be in the vocabulary of a Japanese soldier. Gramling's report is contemporary, and he was a credible reporter. But it remains the only source that mentions Lollapalooza specifically. No after-action reports, No official Marine Corps documentation, no corroboration from other war correspondents or memoirists backs up its use. That doesn't disprove it, but it does place the claim in the realm of plausible but unverified. And here lies the danger. Over the decades, popular accounts have expanded the story beyond what the evidence supports. Some have claimed that pronunciation testing was used across the entire Pacific theater in a formal, systematic way. Others have introduced invented statistics or dramatic anecdotes that appear nowhere in the historical record. These embellishments may make for exciting storytelling, but they also muddy the waters. They distort the past and risk turning a powerful, specific moment into a blurry legend. The verified version of the story is powerful enough on its own. It shows American forces observing patterns in enemy behavior and language, thinking creatively under pressure, and implementing a linguistic test that could, and did, save lives. It also speaks to the constant anxiety of the Pacific Campaign, where infiltration was not just a possibility, but a nightly reality, and where every Marine at a checkpoint knew that one slip could bring disaster. It's also a story enriched by complexity. The presence of Japanese-American linguists trained at the Military Intelligence Service Language School further complicates the narrative. These Nisei soldiers served with distinction, using their language skills to provide critical intelligence throughout the Pacific, all while many of their families remained unjustly imprisoned in internment camps back home. For these men, language was not just a test. It was a bridge, a tool of service, and a mark of resilience. Their professionalism and loyalty under such conditions add a deeply human dimension to the war's linguistic legacy. In the end, the documented historical record is clear. Marines at Guadalcanal implemented pronunciation-based password testing, using words that featured the English L sound, a deliberate strategy to expose Japanese infiltrators. This method was directly confirmed by combat correspondent James Hurlbut and aligns with linguistic principles that remain valid today. The word Lollapalooza appears in one credible contemporary source and fits the intended purpose, though further corroboration remains elusive. Claims of broader theater-wide programs remain unproven, and embellishments have, over time, distorted the scale and nature of the practice. What remains is still remarkable, a moment when human observation, linguistic insight, and battlefield necessity intersected. The lessons of Guadalcanal, from pronunciation testing to perimeter defense, would go on to shape American operations for the rest of the war. Each campaign that followed brought new refinements in tactics, logistics, and command. But it all began with practical minds facing real problems and answering them not with advanced technology, but with the power of language itself. The amphibious assaults that followed Guadalcanal, from the blood-soaked reefs of Tarawa to the volcanic ash of Iwo Jima, the dense jungles of the Philippines, the critical airfields of the Marianas, and finally, the brutal, grinding battles of Okinawa were built on lessons first forged in the crucible of that early campaign. While no documentation exists confirming that pronunciation testing was systematically employed in these later operations, with the same clarity we have for Guadalcanal, the foundational logic remained intact. Exploiting linguistic differences for security purposes was not only sound in theory, it had been proven effective in the field. What's remarkable is that the Marines at Guadalcanal didn't need linguistic theory to guide them. They weren't trained in phonetics or a second language acquisition, yet they recognized through direct experience that many Japanese speakers struggled with the English L sound, and that this difficulty could be harnessed as a tool for survival. That's the essence of practical field knowledge. Observation turned into action. Insight applied under pressure, without needing the academic scaffolding that would come later. This intuitive approach, driven by necessity, anticipated scientific discoveries still years away. The theoretical foundation would be laid after the war. Research during and following World War II, studies that would eventually shape fields like linguistics, psycholinguistics, and cognitive science, helped explain why pronunciation testing worked. But in the moment, the Marines relied on instinct, field testing, and immediate results. Their innovation proved how powerful practical intelligence could be when married to real-world problem-solving. The legacy of these wartime language-based tests stretches far beyond the beaches and jungles of the Pacific. In later conflicts, including the Vietnam War, similar principles were adapted. Language once again became a tool for distinguishing allies from enemies. The linguistic contrasts were different, shaped by new environments and languages, but the logic was the same. Speech contains the echoes of origin, and even when intentions are hidden, accent and pronunciation often are not. In more recent times, language-based security methods have evolved dramatically. Sophisticated systems now incorporate voice stress analysis, dialect detection algorithms, and even biometric voice prints. But in a sense, all of these technologies owe a conceptual debt to the same principle tested at Guadalcanal. That speech, shaped by childhood and culture, carries identifying features that can be analyzed, measured, and understood. And yet, with innovation comes responsibility. The ethical dimension of pronunciation testing deserves serious reflection. Unlike harsh interrogation techniques, coercive screenings, or deceptive psychological operations, L-based pronunciation tests were nonviolent. They functioned diagnostically, identifying individuals not by race or appearance, but by the phonetic imprints of their upbringing. Those who passed were allowed to proceed. Those who failed were scrutinized, not because of how they looked, but because of how they spoke. This distinction mattered then, and it matters now. It's also here that pronunciation testing reveals something deeper, something about the relationship between language and identity. Japanese American soldiers, many of them serving as linguists in the military intelligence service, would pass these tests without hesitation. Their heritage was Japanese, but their linguistic identity, the speech patterns wired into them in childhood, was American. In this way, pronunciation testing unwittingly demonstrated that language, not ethnicity, was the true marker of background. It exposed not the race of the speaker, but the contours of their early linguistic environment. This realization, though perhaps only subconsciously acknowledged during the war, marked a step forward in understanding the complex intersections of culture, language, and identity. But no understanding of this story is complete without recognizing the human side of it, the lives at stake, the pressures faced, the courage displayed on both sides. The Marines, who stood sentry in the blackness of a jungle night, their rifles ready, their ears trained for the sound of a single syllable, deserve recognition for their resourcefulness. Their innovation helped save lives. At the same time, the Japanese soldiers they faced were experienced, disciplined, and often fighting under conditions of extreme hardship. Their missions required immense stealth and courage, especially as their supply lines crumbled and the terrain turned ever more hostile. In the years that followed, the science of language acquisition would catch up to what the Marines had learned firsthand. Researchers like Patricia Kuhl uncovered the neurological processes that make pronunciation testing possible. Studies showed that infants are born capable of perceiving the full range of human speech sounds, regardless of language. But over time, as early as the first year of life, the brain begins to narrow its sensitivity, tuning itself to the phonemes of the language phase spoken around the child. This process, often referred to as neural commitment, is essential for language mastery. It makes communication faster and more efficient. But it also creates limitations. It makes acquiring new sound categories much more difficult later in life. And it's exactly those limits that made pronunciation testing work. In retrospect, the use of language in the Guadalcanal campaign was more than just clever strategy. It was a preview of how linguistic knowledge could be applied in the real world, under the most demanding conditions imaginable. It showed how the architecture of the mind, built quietly in childhood, could become a battlefield of its own. The story of L-based pronunciation testing isn't just a story of war. It's a story of adaptation, ingenuity, and the enduring power of language to reveal, to protect, and to divide. Adult Japanese speakers striving to master the English L and R sounds were not merely learning new tongue placements or airflow patterns. What they were truly attempting was far more complex, an effort to rewire deeply ingrained neural pathways, sound categories that had been etched into the brain during early childhood. Cognitive science has since confirmed just how monumental this task is. Once a person's phonetic categories are formed, usually by the end of the first year of life, they become neurologically stable, resistant to change, and difficult, if not impossible, to fully reconfigure in adulthood. This explains why even fluent second language speakers often retain accents. Their brains still perceive and process sounds through the filter of their native language. The wartime practice of pronunciation testing didn't just save lives, it also helped spark a revolution in our understanding of language and accent. Before the war, accented speech was often misunderstood. It was seen as simply incorrect, something that could be fixed with more practice, more drills, more effort. But the post-war era brought new insights. Researchers began to realize that foreign accent isn't a matter of sloppiness or poor instruction. It reflects deep-seated differences in how phonetic information is perceived and organized in the brain. Pronunciation wasn't just about motor skills, it was about perception. And perception, when shaped early, becomes stubbornly hard to change. This had direct implications for military security. It meant that pronunciation testing wasn't a gimmick or a coincidence. It was based on enduring cognitive truths that made it not only viable in the Pacific War, but potentially applicable in any conflict where opposing forces speak different languages. And as the decades passed, the principle was adapted and refined. While modern security operations now use tools like voice stress analysis and linguistic profiling, these advancements are built upon the same foundation, the recognition that speech carries involuntary traceable markers of identity. Consider the figure of Technical Sergeant Paul Yamamoto, a name symbolic rather than confirmed by historical records, but representative of the thousands of Japanese-American soldiers who served during World War II. Yamamoto, like many Nisei, grew up in the United States. He spoke English as his native language. His accent was American. And that native pronunciation made clear that linguistic identity can, and often does, cross ethnic boundaries. His presence in the U.S. ranks during a war against Japan underscored the point. Ethnicity and language background are not the same. Meanwhile, Japanese infiltrators attempting to mimic American speech often revealed themselves through their pronunciation, not because of how they looked, but because of how they had learned to speak. As the summer of 1945 unfolded, Allied planners prepared for what was expected to be the most difficult and deadly phase of the Pacific War, the invasion of the Japanese home islands. Such an operation would have brought American forces into dense urban centers, into the heart of Japanese society, where enemy combatants would have unlimited access to local resources, civilian clothing, and potential sympathy from the population. The threat of infiltration would no longer be occasional. It would be constant. In response, Allied strategists began developing detailed security protocols, identification cards, movement restrictions, checkpoints, layered documentation, and yes, continued use of pronunciation testing. The goal was redundancy. No single measure would be sufficient, but together they might prevent catastrophic breaches. These protocols were never implemented. Japan surrendered in August 1945 following the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, bringing an abrupt end to the war. But the planning materials remained, and in the decades that followed, as wartime records were declassified, historians found a wealth of information detailing how security was conceived and executed in the Pacific Theater. While direct documentation of pronunciation testing remained limited, still centered on James Hurlbut's testimony and a reference in Gremlin's wartime account, the larger story came into sharper focus. It became clear that the use of language for security was just one thread in a much broader fabric of innovation. The war was won not only by tanks and bombers, but by thousands of small, field-driven solutions. Sentries standing guard in the jungle, commanders making snap decisions, translators decoding messages, linguists analyzing speech patterns, all contributed, often in unseen ways, to the Allied victory. And this is perhaps the most enduring lesson of the pronunciation testing story. Military success depends not just on grand strategy or overwhelming force. It also depends on observation, ingenuity, and adaptation, on the ability of individuals to recognize patterns, test ideas, and solve immediate problems with the tools at hand. Pronunciation testing didn't come from a laboratory. It came from Marines listening closely, noticing subtle patterns, and acting on them. The fact that this method also opened new frontiers in linguistic science is a testament to its depth. Researchers like Patricia Kuhl would later show how infants begin life with a universal capacity to hear every phonetic contrast in every language. But this capacity narrows rapidly as the brain specializes for the native language environment. By the end of the first year, infants are already tuning out non-native sounds. This is what allows language to be processed fluently, but it also creates lifelong challenges in acquiring new phonetic systems. In wartime, those developmental limits became tactical advantages. A missed L, a shifted R, a mispronounced word in the dark could mean the difference between life and death. And even as the gunfire faded and peace returned, the echoes of those linguistic encounters shaped not only our understanding of conflict, but of what it means to speak, to listen, and to belong. The recognition that language could serve not just as a means of communication, but as a tactical instrument, marked a striking moment of practical intelligence in the midst of brutal jungle warfare. At Guadalcanal, the systematic use of L-based passwords was not born from academic theory or institutional doctrine. It emerged from necessity. Faced with the terrifying uncertainty of night infiltration, where uniforms could be stolen, papers forged, and faces hidden by darkness, American Marines turned to something subtle but powerful: the structure of speech itself. It was an innovation that may not have matched the drama or complexity described in later popular accounts, but it was real, it was effective, and it addressed a critical security challenge in real time. Today, the story of pronunciation testing at Guadalcanal endures as a minor yet meaningful chapter in the broader narrative of the Pacific War. It reminds us that warfare is not waged by grand strategy alone. It is fought, and often won, through countless tactical adaptations, improvised solutions, and creative responses to immediate threats. In this case, that response took the form of a spoken test, grounded in the realities of human language. Language, that most deeply human trait, became, in this context, a line of defense. A single syllable, spoken correctly or not, could determine whether a figure in the dark was friend or foe. The idea rested on solid linguistic ground. The phonological systems of Japanese and English differ fundamentally in how they handle liquid consonants. Japanese has only one such phoneme, often rendered as an R, and lacks the LR contrast that defines English. This means that native Japanese speakers, especially those who learned English later in life, often struggle to distinguish and produce these sounds. The Marines didn't need a linguistics degree to recognize this. They learned it in the field through careful listening and repetition. That recognition became a tool, and the tool worked. Sentries could issue a challenge word containing L sounds. A native English speaker would pronounce it effortlessly. A Japanese speaker, even one with training in English, might struggle, especially under the stress of a nighttime confrontation. The test was fast, discreet, and reliable. It didn't require gear, credentials, or background checks. It required only a trained ear and a basic understanding of who was supposed to be where. Of course, like all wartime innovations, pronunciation testing had its limits. It wasn't foolproof. Japanese infiltrators who had grown up with English or who had received advanced language training might pass the test. Accents among friendly forces, including those from the Philippines, China, and other allied nations, could potentially lead to misidentification. And while the testing was used at Guadalcanal, there's no evidence of a vast Pacific-wide program or a centrally coordinated linguistic screening initiative. The myth, in some cases, has grown larger than the facts. Yet the facts, as they stand, are powerful. Testimony from combat correspondent James Hurlbut confirms the practice. The 1942 account by journalist Oliver Gramling adds an intriguing, if singular, example in Lollapalooza. The linguistic basis for the method is well established by decades of research, and most importantly, the results, the saved lives, the maintained perimeters, the moments of clarity in a chaotic theater speak for themselves. By facing the historical evidence with honesty, celebrating the verified achievements without exaggeration, we honor the Marines who fought at Guadalcanal more fully. Their security innovations, like their combat performance, emerged not from luxury, but from pressure. They held Henderson Field. They resisted wave after wave of Japanese assaults, and in between, they devised ways to protect their lines using whatever knowledge they had, even the sounds of a word. The core of the story holds. American forces at Guadalcanal exploited a subtle but real linguistic distinction, the way Japanese and English speakers pronounce liquid consonants, to devise a field-expedient method of identifying infiltrators. Whether the knowledge came from formal understanding or hard-earned observation, it represented exactly the kind of adaptive, ground-level thinking that defines tactical success. And it became one more thread in the complex tapestry of Allied victory in the Pacific.